And he picks it up and he starts to play something. I have no idea if he was any good or not, but I knew immediately I was interested in this instrument. I didn't know we had it, and that was cool. I like that. I want to learn how to play that. So I grab the cornet and I run up the stairs and I find my dad, who is a trombone player, Dixieland trombone player. Dad, I want to play the trumpet. Show me. I want to learn the trumpet. He was thrilled because he did not have a trumpet player for his Dixieland band. So he said, okay. So we went downstairs and he knew just enough. And he put on the wall a little staff paper and wrote little whole notes of the C scale and put the fingerings on it, showed me how to hold it, how to produce the sound, and said, okay, when you can play that, come upstairs. So I stood down there, I don't know how long, but I stood there practicing the C scale from the beginning until I could play it. And then I came racing up the stairs. I got it. I can play it. He said, okay. Well, while I was doing that, he was notating two familiar songs for me. Jingle Bells and When the Saints Go Marching In. And he had the notation for me and he said, okay, you know these songs, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, now you know what the fingerings are, right? I said, yeah. He said, okay, well, when you can play these songs, you're in the band. Okay, right? And 2 weeks later, I played my first gig with the Alexander Family Band. That experience never left me. There was no one hanging or dangling a carrot in front of me. If you practice this many minutes a day, then you can be able to do this or do that. No, it was, when you learn these tunes, you can join us. You can be a musician with us. And I never had to deal with that from my family. The only time I ever dealt with somebody telling me I had to practice certain amounts of minutes was when I got into public school. And I discovered that I had a talent for forging my father's name. I didn't need to practice a lot of the things that were being assigned to me. But if I didn't have the right amount of minutes on my paper, then I wasn't going to get a good grade, even though I could play everything just fine. So my answer was, sign Dad's name. He hardly ever signed anything for school, so I knew I could get away with it. So that is at the crux of one of the major issues we have in teaching, and that is this requirement of practice cards and what it means. So in this presentation, what I want to do is I'm going to start by just showing you a brief video. Some of you have seen it, but it's just a very short video with a little compilation of some of my groups that I've taught. In particular, these are jazz bands. That's kind of my passion, my thing. So I have just a short video to give you a little taste of what I'm doing and the kinds of things that students are doing even without having practice cards being required or certain amounts of practice being required. Then I'm going to tell you a bit about what motivation is and some really interesting research in motivation and why it's important. Also how it affects student practice and the ways that you can inspire student practice. And I'll intersperse this with a few student videos. So to start with, here's just a short video of students. Now these are students mostly 5th grade, but there are some ringers. There are some 4th graders in here. And these are from a very typical elementary school in Greece, outside of Rochester here. And none of these students took private lessons. Everyone learned from me. to stand up in front of that every day. So, what are some of the reasons that music teachers require practice records or practice cards as I do them? What are some reasons?
Accountability.
Accountability.
Establish good habits.
Establishing a habit. Right? A record of it. Some kind of a record. All right? All seemingly good reasons. What were your experiences with practice records? I told you mine became a forger. Did they work for you? Did they work for you personally? I mean, maybe for some people that is a true motivator to want to make music. Do you feel that when you practiced that you were efficient? If you knew you had to practice 30 minutes, I mean, I hear stories all the time from people, children, who say, all right, well, here's the timer. When the timer goes off, then you've practiced 30 minutes. Here's one thing I think of. How many kids go beyond that? Mostly zero. All right, if they're paying attention to a timer, they're probably not going to exceed that timer. That's a problem. We want to make it interesting all on its own, right? All right, think about this. Why did you want to become a musician? What attracted you to playing an instrument? Why did you want to do it? You know, we all have different reasons. And did your experiences feed that desire? And do you do that now as a teacher? Really important questions to ask yourself. So, all of this comes down to motivation. So I want to teach you some interesting things about motivation that absolutely fascinated me as I started to dig into this area. So there's two main types of motivation. The first one is the intrinsic motivation, right? This is our instinctive human drive to want to be challenged, to learn things, and to have a much deeper understanding of the world around us. You can look to a young infant, a toddler, to see the purest examples of this. They learn through play. They're curious. No one is telling them they have to do it. They want to. You can also think of it in terms of your hobbies. What do you do when you don't have to do work, right? Those are the things you're intrinsically motivated to do. So in music, students who are intrinsically motivated might say things like, I can't wait to practice my instrument, and mean it. Playing in band rehearsals makes me happy. I love learning something new in my lessons. All right, then of course there's the complete other end of the spectrum, extrinsic motivation, and that's basically all of the rest of it. Every kind of motivation that comes from outside of yourself. So examples of things that students who are extrinsically motivated might say is, I play an instrument because my parents are making me do it, or I get punished if I don't practice, or I practice so I can get an A on my grade report. The traditional view of motivation is called behaviorism. All right? This goes back to like Pavlov, right? So that's the conditioned response model of motivation. Essentially, in a nutshell, you do this, you get that. You misbehave in class, you're going to get punished, right? That's what most of us grew up believing. That's still a very common thought today. But the research is starting to tell us something very, very different. It turns out we are not quite as easily manipulated as it may seem, and certainly as behaviorism would suggest. So I know that this, unfortunately, this projector is a little bit lame, but hopefully you can see, or I'll try to describe things that are crystal clear. There was an extremely interesting study done in the 1940s by a psychologist, Carl Jung. And what he did was he asked participants to sit down at this little cubicle and looking at this candle, a box of thumbtacks, and a book of matches, he asked them to attach the candle to the wall so that when you lit it, it would not drip on the table. And he offered half of the participants money to do it the fastest. So if you did it quickly, you made good money. And the other half of the participants, they just asked, just solve it. And what was shocking was that when he went and looked at all the results, it turned out that the people who had been offered money to solve the problem the fastest solved the problem on average 3 minutes slower than the people who hadn't been offered any money at all. This went against everything that behaviorism was saying, so that study was largely ignored. So, have you figured out the answer? You know the answer? Some of you may know this already, but have you had enough time to ponder it? All right, here's the answer. You have to think out of the box. You have to dump the thumbtacks out, attach it to the wall, put the candle in, and then you can light it. It's very simple. Once you see it, you're like, oh, I get it, right? But it was an interesting test, an interesting puzzle. So this man, Edward Deci, came along, and as a graduate student, he was interested in this research, and he conducted his own study using a Soma puzzle. All right, so a Soma puzzle looks like that, but it breaks into pieces that look like this, okay? And then he asked participants to build these models using these odd-shaped pieces. And it's a little tricky, all right? And so for his study, he again offered half the participants some good money to solve these problems, as many as they could in 10 minutes, I think. And then the other half just asked them to solve the puzzle, see how many they could do. But what he did differently is he wanted to look at what they did during their free time. So after they completed this 10-minute period, he went in the room and said, oh, I need to go and get a form for you to sign. I got to go in this other building. It might take me 10 minutes, but I'll be right back. And of course went around the corner to the two-way mirror, very popular in the 70s, and peered through and took notes of what were these people doing. And he provided magazines and a comfortable chair, right? Almost without exception, the people who had been paid to build the puzzles stopped building the puzzles. And the people who had not been offered any financial incentive or any incentive of any kind continued to work on the puzzles just because it was interesting. Now that study led to hundreds and now thousands more studies that have shown the same thing. You increase the incentives, you end up lowering performance. You know, I read that for the first time, like, that can't be right. That can't be right. But it is right. So why? Why do these incentives fail? All right, now, I am talking in the longer term, okay? So, and I'll address that in a moment. But incentives, they're controlling. Someone offers you an incentive to do something because they want you to do something. They want to control what you do, right? That's why we do it. They hurt our relationships because guess what? The person who's offering you the incentive is also judging you. They also don't tell us what the real problem is, what's at the root of the issue. All right, I like telling this story because I think it illustrates this really well. I had a young student who was doing well. All of a sudden, we're in our second week of not having an instrument for lessons. What's happened? You know? Now, I could have just said, all right, if you remember your trumpet next week, I'm going to give you some candy, all right? Or I could have said, if you don't bring your trumpet next week, you're going to get an F. But what I did, thankfully, is I sat the student down away from the other students and I said, what's going on, honey? What's happening? And what I found out is she had forgotten her trumpet on the bus, was afraid to tell her parents who were getting a divorce and fighting all the time. And she was just in this horrible place. And all I had to do was pick up the phone and call the bus garage and get the trumpet for her, right? But if I hadn't taken the time to talk to her to find out what the cause was for her behavior that I didn't agree with, right? I would have never been able to help her solve that problem. The other problem with incentives, they discourage risk-taking, right? You're less likely to go beyond what the incentive asks you to do. You're less likely to take that risk, to do something more difficult if you need to attain this particular goal. And ultimately, they will undermine your genuine interest for the task. So you end up with this. If you say, okay, all right, Joy, if you practice your trumpet 30 minutes today, you get to watch television tonight. There have to be a lot of parents who've done that, and I understand, right? But what are you telling them? You're telling them that there is no value in playing your trumpet unless you get a reward for it. That that's the reason to do that. That this isn't reason enough. And they get that message loud and clear. So I love this quote from Alfie Kohn. Do rewards motivate people? Yes. They motivate them to get rewards. All right, there's an exception. Incentives, rewards, or punishments, all the same, carrot, sticks, all the same topic. They will work for a task that is very simple and mechanical. Right? They've done these studies in factory workers and things like that, and they found that if they have to do a mindless task, then those incentives will work. They will produce more product or whatever they're trying to get. So an example for us would be memorize the names of the lines and spaces of the treble clef, right? That's about as close as I can think. That's pretty simple memorization. We're not asking for more than just regurgitating the names of lines and spaces. That would be a good example of that. However, as soon as the task requires even a little bit of cognitive skill, then the incentives are not going to work. Not in the long term, for sure. And they're going to affect the performance, the quality of performance. So a simple example would be an assignment of sing and play hot cross buns. So why are these carrots and sticks, as they're commonly known in psychology, so prevalent in teaching and in our whole society? Well, first of all, yes, they will produce compliance. You can get people to comply with what you want them to do. And they're easy. It doesn't take much thought, right? They're pretty simple. It's very tempting. But what's wrong with them? All right? When we offer incentives for learning, then we imply that that learning has no value on its own. That it's not something that you want to do. You only want to do it because of what you're going to get for doing it. All right? Rewards and punishments are also the tools of manipulation and control, and they do not support students' needs for autonomy. Like I said, there are thousands of studies that have shown these results. I want to tell you a little story that I experienced. When I began my career, I believed what most teachers believed that I knew, and that's if you wanted your students to practice, well, then you better give them stickers and candy as an incentive. That's how you're going to get them to practice. So I always had lots of good bags of candy, and I bought all these great stickers, you know, those little smiley stickers, right? And I made this huge elaborate chart, and I had all the kids' names, and I had all the tunes they were learning and the different keys, and oh man, this was an impressive chart. It took up most of my wall, you know? That was good. So I had this huge chart, and I also had extra fancy stickers and candy for students who learned songs on their own and came in and played them for us. This worked brilliantly for a while. I noticed as the year started moving on, halfway through the year, I'm like seeing, oh, seems like the same kids are getting these same stickers, and now there's less stickers on the board, and there's less interest, and less people are, oh, I need to up the ante. So I came up with a new program. All right, now it's better stickers, and it's bigger candy, and what did I see? It wasn't long at all. In fact, real short before it was the same little group of students who were coming in, getting those same things week after week. The other students were just losing interest. Until I had a lesson with Joey, I'll call him, that changed my whole perspective. He was a 5th grader who was very, very good clarinetist. And he often played extra songs that he learned by ear on his own. And he came into class, and we had our lesson, and afterwards he said, I have a song I learned I'd like to play for you. Cool, let's hear it. And he stood there and he played the theme from Star Wars, like, really well. It was impressive, right? I'm like, yeah, that was great. Go help yourself to the stickers and the candy. And he looked at me and he said, no thanks. I just really enjoyed getting to learn the songs. And he turned around and he walked out of my room, and I was like, huh. That was huge for me. I realized in that moment that by rewarding what he had done, I was devaluing the personal satisfaction that he experienced by learning it. And he wasn't going to let me do it. So, the next year, there were none of those charts on the walls. I took them all down. I had my own record, but that wasn't to be plastered on the walls. And instead, I offered kids the chance to just play for their peers, play on the morning announcements, play on a concert. I gave them opportunities to play. We celebrated all of the performances. Big, great, not so great, all right? And the excitement and enthusiasm exploded. And the next year, well, first, by the end of that year, progress of the students far exceeded anything I had ever experienced before. And not one student dropped the instrument for the following year. Wow, right? Now that doesn't happen every year, but that happened that year, and that was huge. So I achieved greater student success by relinquishing controlling incentives in favor of autonomy support.